James Brown's daughter reveals the horrifying secret that made her hate him forever. James Brown was celebrated as a musical god, the man who made the world dance, who helped calm a city on the brink of chaos. But behind the blinding spotlight and roaring applause, his own daughter says she lived in terror. For 42 years, she kept a horrifying secret locked inside the night she thought her mother would die at the hands of the godfather of soul. Today, that truth is finally unleashed. Are you ready to confront the side of a legend the world never wanted to see? Hit subscribe. Now this is Legends of Black Excellence. The Silent Terror, a daughter's secret. After 42 years. For over 4 decades, the world only saw the glittering mask. James Brown, the legend, who transformed soul music, moved continents with his raw power, and commanded stages like a king. Fans called him the godfather of soul, a genius, a revolutionary whose voice sparked cultural pride. Crowds screamed his name, newspapers worshipped his triumphs, and every rhythm he released felt like lightning trapped in sound. Yet while millions celebrated him as a force of good, one young girl lived with a truth she had no words to explain. That girl was Yama Brown, and her silence was not admiration, it was fear. From the outside, James Brown appeared invincible. He towered over the music industry, his fame shielding him from suspicion. Cameras captured a smiling father, one who gifted joy and freedom through his songs. But cameras never followed him home. His youngest daughter learned early to measure danger through footsteps, tone shifts, and sudden silences. She had no chance to understand why her heart pounded every time a door slammed. She only knew she must stay quiet. Because when the door closed and the spotlight faded, the hero the world adored would sometimes become someone she didn't recognize. As she grew older, Yama carried a memory she tried desperately to bury. A memory that shaped every breath she inhaled. She never shared it with classmates or friends. She refused to let it escape her locked mind, convinced no one would ever believe a child over a global icon. But the secret stayed alive, pulsing like a wound under the surface. Even as she matured, she could not look at magazine covers of her father without feeling something sharp twist inside her resentment, confusion, and a question that haunted her. Why would the person meant to protect her become the source of her nightmares? She watched fans idolize him, unaware that their hero's actions had carved permanent scars into his daughter's heart. Whenever James Brown appeared on television, celebrated as a cultural savior or a symbol of strength, Yama felt invisible. Her trauma did not fit the narrative the world demanded. She lived inside 2 realities, the mythical father cherished by audiences and the man whose temper could ignite terror within seconds. That contradiction tightened around her childhood like iron chains. Years passed, but wounds never healed on their own. Yama reached adulthood repeatedly asking herself if time could erase what he had done. Yet every memory reminded her it couldn't. The truth was too painful, too violent, too real. And every time she heard applause dedicated to James Brown, it echoed like mockery, as if the world was cheering for the very man who stole her innocence. Hatred was not something she sought, it grew naturally from betrayal. After 42 years, she finally made a choice. If silence protected a lie, then speaking out would set her free. The horrifying secret she had guarded for a lifetime would be exposed to the world, not to destroy her father's legacy, but to reclaim her own life. And once her voice broke the silence, there was no turning back. Born into violence. The hell that shaped James Brown. James Brown's earliest memories were shaped not by music, but by fear. Born into the harsh climate of the Jim Crow South, his world was divided before he even understood what separation meant. As a small boy in Barnwell, South Carolina, he saw signs that reminded his family where they could and could not stand. Every corner of the town echoed inequality. Even the air felt heavy with rules meant to break spirits. But the most terrifying law he faced wasn't written in public. It lived inside his own home. His father, Joe Brown, drank away hope and returned with rage boiling beneath his skin. Little James learned quickly that footsteps in the night often brought shouting, breaking furniture, and the sound of fists crashing into flesh. His mother, Susie Bell, tried to protect him, shielding him with shaking arms. Yet each argument grew more vicious. The boy watched his mother forced to endure suffering that had no explanation. Her tears became an everyday sight, and her silence afterward became its own kind of scream. The violence was relentless. James stood in corners frozen, wishing he could understand why love sounded so painful. That misunderstanding would shape how he viewed affection forever. One evening, after yet another brutal fight, Susie vanished from the house without a farewell. Her sudden departure shattered what little stability remained. The absence of her warmth carved a hole inside him, a hole that would never fully close. With no capacity to raise a child alone and drowning in poverty, Joe sent his son to Augusta, Georgia. There, James was placed under the care of an aunt, whose primary business was running a brothel. The building pulsed with adult chaos, strangers entering and leaving at all hours, loud laughter fueled by liquor and smoke floating through the hallway. Children rarely belong in such places, yet this brothel became his new universe. He slept behind threadbare curtains, hearing noises no child should hear. Shame and loneliness replaced innocence. Meals were scarce, and hunger growled louder than any music. He scavenged discarded scraps from trash cans just to stay alive. The humiliation cut deep, teaching him that survival required desperation. School offered no refuge. His clothes were torn, shoes barely held together with wire, and classmates mocked his appearance. Racism targeted him from every direction. White boys hurled rocks and insults whenever he dared walk too close. Even church, a sanctuary for many, felt distant because he believed he didn't belong anywhere. Still beneath the hardship, something fierce began to grow. He told himself that one day people would chant his name, not throw stones at it. That fragile dream kept him moving forward even as every day tried to crush it. At 13 years old, misfortune and survival instinct collided. James stole clothing from a parked vehicle in an attempt to look less invisible. Caught and convicted of theft, he was sent to a juvenile facility often referred to as a reform school. The environment was cold, regimented, and merciless. He fought to protect himself and endured strict discipline that punished any sign of weakness. But within those walls, music crept into his life like a lifeline. He met another teen who recognized potential in his raw talent and encouraged him to perform. The two formed a friendship built on rhythm and ambition rather than fear. In that bleak institution, James discovered the first spark of purpose. Every beat he created reminded him that his existence didn't have to be defined by trauma. Yet while music offered escape, the scars carved during childhood remained etched in memory. Violence had been his first teacher, abandonment, his first heartbreak, and humiliation his constant companion. The same oppression that crushed families across the South had already sculpted the boy who would rise to international acclaim. His childhood was a battlefield long before he stepped onto a stage, and those early battles shaped the legend and the darkness he would later unleash. Fame and control. The first marriage that cracked. Fame arrived for James Brown like a sudden storm. His first breakout recording, performed with unmatched fire, grabbed national attention and opened the door to relentless touring. Crowds could not look away from the man collapsing to his knees, drenched in sweat but refusing to quit. With every performance, his confidence grew sharper, his ambition more consuming. During this early rise, he met Velma Warren, a quiet and supportive woman who seemed to offer everything his unstable childhood lacked: calm, loyalty, and structure. They married in a modest ceremony, far from red carpets or magazine covers, believing they were building something solid despite the whirlwind of his career. Becoming a father should have softened him, but success made him harder. Teddy, then Terry, and finally Larry were welcomed into the world. Yet the household never felt like a sanctuary. James believed discipline was the only path to greatness. What he had endured as a child, fear and survival, now became his model for parenting. Velma cared deeply for her sons, shielding them from chaos whenever possible. But her husband treated the family less like loved ones and more like soldiers under his command. He rarely asked. He demanded. In his mind, love was proven through obedience, not affection. The pressure within those walls never eased. On stage, the transformation was even more dramatic. James ruled his band with absolute authority. He expected perfect timing, flawless choreography, and unwavering loyalty. Any mistake was treated like a personal insult. Musicians feared missing a single note because punishment came instantly. A wrong beat meant $50 deducted from their pay, sometimes more. The fines were humiliating, issued publicly to remind everyone who held power. Members who challenged him or questioned his orders didn't receive warnings, they were fired on the spot. To James, maintaining control wasn't just a choice, it was survival. Despite the rigid discipline, he kept pushing himself and his ensemble farther. He introduced new dance routines, demanded tighter arrangements, and drilled his team for hours without rest. Audiences adored the electrifying results, unaware of the tense faces backstage after the curtains fell. Velma observed the pattern. The higher he climbed, the harsher he became. Admiration from the outside world only magnified his need to dominate the inside world. Fame validated every instinct he had about authority, feeding the belief that he had earned the right to command absolute submission from everyone around him, including family. While Velma stood beside a superstar, she was treated like a shadow. Her presence was hidden from the public eye, as if a wife and children might dilute the myth of the untouchable musical warrior. Nights when James returned from touring could shift without warning from laughter to volatile confrontation. Velma learned to remain silent to avoid igniting conflict. The three boys tiptoed around their father, afraid to misplace a toy or speak too loudly. Even moments of kindness felt unstable, brief pauses in a cycle they all expected to resume. With a global reputation rising and hit records stacking up, James Brown's legacy as a performer was unstoppable. Yet his success came at a severe cost. Inside his home, the pressure, fear, and emotional distance created fractures that only deepened with time. Velma and her sons lived in the glow of a legend who shined brightest for strangers, while those closest to him struggled in the shadows of his unyielding rule. The public part of his story celebrated brilliance and influence, but behind closed doors, a different truth had already begun to harden the hearts of the ones who shared his last name. Hero on stage, monster at home, the Boston illusion. In the spring of 1968, America was suspended between heartbreak and fury. When Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 4th, dozens of cities erupted in riots. Streets burned, sirens wailed, and grief boiled into rage. Boston braced for chaos as thousands gathered at the Garden Arena where James Brown was scheduled to perform. Officials feared the night would dissolve into violence. Yet when Brown stepped into the spotlight, he did something unexpected. Instead of leaning into entertainment, he turned the stage into a platform for unity, pleading with the crowd to honor Dr. King through restraint rather than destruction. His voice carried authority. Every command landed with force. He persuaded the audience to remain calm, and even when some rushed the stage, he appealed to their pride, "Show the world who we are." Amazingly, the crowd listened. The concert ended without catastrophe. The following morning, headlines credited him with preventing a riot. James Brown saves Boston. In that moment, newspapers and television networks hailed him as more than a performer. He was presented as a community leader, a man strong enough to hold back an entire city's grief. The world saw a savior, a symbol of dignity and power in a frightening time. But the applause outside never softened the atmosphere at home. The same determination that commanded arenas turned volatile behind closed doors. Velma and her sons learned to brace themselves whenever the crowd's cheers faded into silence. The pressure weighing upon James did not vanish after his heroic act. It intensified. The expectation to always be a public champion carved deeper cracks into his private life. He carried the burden like a shield, one he sometimes hurled at the people who loved him most. His son, Larry Brown, later remembered that the household always felt like preparation for war even on the happiest days. While media celebrated his soothing message to young Black Americans, Velma kept her lips sealed about the unrest within their own walls. Fans and journalists witnessed a composed leader speaking about peace, justice, and responsibility. They did not see a father whose temper could ignite with the smallest disappointment. Anyone who lived with him knew that the stage persona, a controlled eruption of charisma, never fully turned off. His energy, once admired in front of thousands, could mutate into rage when no one was watching. Every magazine cover spotlighting his heroism stood as a painful contradiction for the family forced to remain silent. Interviews praised him for saving lives. Meanwhile, his children learned to disappear into corners when his mood shifted. Velma, once hopeful that success might bring intimacy, recognized that fame widened the emotional gulf. The stronger his public influence grew, the more fragile peace became at home. History remembers his Boston performance as a remarkable triumph, a moment where music protected a city from tearing itself apart. Yet the hidden tragedy remained: the same man who calmed a crowd of thousands could not calm the storm in his own living room. In the public eye, James Brown was a beacon of strength. In private, his family endured a darkness no audience would ever applaud. The Bloody Night of 1975. Yama's childhood nightmare. The 1970s marked a turning point in James Brown's story, not just as an entertainer, but as a polarizing public figure. At the start of the decade, he married Dedra Dee Dee Jenkins, a vibrant young woman with dreams of a peaceful family. Their union seemed to promise healing after his turbulent first marriage. For a brief moment, James tried to present a softer image, convinced that a new beginning could erase old pain. However, political choices soon ignited a storm he could not control. When Brown publicly endorsed President Richard Nixon in 1972, a wave of backlash swept through the Black community. Former allies distanced themselves. Fans protested. Concerts that once sold out now struggled. The rejection pierced him deeper than applause ever lifted him. Unable to face humiliation outside, he turned inward, and his household suffered the consequences. Dee Dee Jenkins, who once admired his strength, found herself targeted by that same force. His temper, sharpened by frustration and substance abuse, exploded unpredictably. Where others saw a misunderstood icon, she encountered a volatile man racing against his own shadows. Doors slammed, threats echoed, beloved objects shattered against walls without warning. Each night became a test of survival. Deanna, the eldest daughter, learned quickly how to gather her baby sister Yama Brown and hide until the danger passed. Though still little, Yama could feel the fear pulsing in the air, fear that her father, the world's star, might transform at any moment. Behind the glamour, James demanded absolute obedience. Dee Dee tried gentle reasoning, pleading for calm, hoping love could temper his aggression. Yet her voice rarely broke through the frenzy. The more the world attacked his reputation, the more determined he became to assert power wherever he could. Music executives, critics, and politicians could defy him, but not his family. For Dee Dee, safety meant silence, and silence eventually became suffocating. Her daughters watched, unable to stop the cycles of apologies, promises, and renewed violence. Then came the night in 1975 that carved itself into memory forever. A sweltering evening in their home turned into a scene of dread when an argument flared into brutality. Yama, only 5, witnessed her father pinning her mother to the ground and raining blows fueled by fury she could not comprehend. Blood spilled onto the kitchen floor, staining tile and childhood innocence alike. In pure instinct, the tiny girl leapt onto James's back, screaming for him to stop. For a moment, time froze the courage of a child facing the terror of a legend. She believed her act might save her mother's life. Instead, she remembers being thrown aside like weightless air. The aftermath left emotional wreckage far deeper than physical bruises. From that night forward, Yama would associate the sound of footsteps, the crack of knuckles, even sudden silence with danger. She never understood why violence replaced affection, why authority replaced care. The disconnect between the father who dazzled stadiums and the man who frightened his family split her heart in two. Dee Dee, holding her daughters close, realized no public glory could hide private trauma. The home that fame built had become a cage. In the following years, the scars of that horrific night continued to throb beneath the surface. James Brown still commanded admiration everywhere he performed, yet his daughters carried memories that applause could never erase. Dee Dee eventually chose escape through separation, but the damage lingered. For Yama, that night in 1975 became the source of a lifelong struggle with trust, and the ultimate reason she could never view her father only as a hero. In her eyes, he remained both a man celebrated by millions and condemned by his own child's haunting recollection. Public scandals and prison time. The Adrienne Rodriguez era. When Adrienne Rodriguez entered James Brown's life in the early 1980s, she brought a bold presence, unlike the quiet endurance of his previous marriages. She was a striking Puerto Rican singer with confidence, ambition, and a refusal to be silenced. At first, their relationship appeared glamorous, two performers united by passion and creativity. But the passion that connected them also became fuel for conflict. Fame and expectation pressured James from all sides, and Adrienne quickly realized that confrontation with a man who demanded total control could turn perilous. She would not shrink herself to protect his ego, and her defiance made the battles between them impossible to hide. As their marriage progressed, arguments spilled beyond the confines of their home. Neighbors often heard shouting objects shattering and doors slamming with enough force to make the entire property tremble. Soon, police officers in Georgia and South Carolina became familiar visitors to the Brown residence. Each report added to a growing public record accusations of violence, pleas for help, and frightened witnesses who wished they could intervene. The story of a beloved entertainer and his troubled private life began to unravel in plain sight. Reporters monitored every development, eager for headlines exposing the star's collapse behind the curtain. The situation escalated dramatically on September 24, 1988. High on drugs and convinced that strangers had trespassed, James stormed into an office building with a weapon demanding answers that made no logical sense. When authorities arrived, he fled in his truck, initiating a 20-mile, two-state car chase that endangered drivers on both sides of the border. Police fired 17 shots into his vehicle's tires before he was finally stopped and arrested. The mugshot splashed across news broadcasts felt like a shocking transformation, the unstoppable performer reduced to a dazed, disheveled man wrestling with demons he could no longer hide. That arrest led to a highly publicized conviction, 6 years in prison for drug possession, firearms violations, and fleeing law enforcement. James Brown attempted to maintain dignity even behind bars, granting interviews and insisting he would stage a triumphant comeback. Fans remained divided, some defending him as a victim of fame's pressures, others convinced his downfall was the inevitable outcome of unchecked fury. Adrienne, meanwhile, kept stepping in and out of the marriage, torn between love and fear, unable to walk away, yet unable to find safety. By the early 1990s, their relationship was irreparably fractured. Police continued to respond to new domestic emergencies. Houses became battlegrounds instead of havens, and each incident chipped further away at the public's willingness to separate the artist from the chaos. Still, Adrienne stayed close her heart, battling logic. Her friends worried that she was losing herself in the storm, sacrificing her well-being to keep up appearances for a man who rarely considered the consequences of his rage. In 1996, at just 47 years old, Adrienne Rodriguez died unexpectedly during cosmetic surgery. The loss sent shockwaves through those who knew her as a fighter, a woman who tried to stand upright in the path of a hurricane. At her funeral, mourners whispered about wasted potential and a life dimmed too soon. Some held James responsible for the emotional toll she endured. Others simply mourned a tragedy that fame could not erase. What remained unmistakable was that their marriage had exposed the darker chapters of his life to the world. The myth of perfection had shattered, and this time everyone could see the damage. The controversial final marriage, Tommy Ray and the legal storm. When Tommy Ray Heine entered James Brown's orbit around the turn of the millennium, she represented vitality and youth at a stage of his life when many icons were preparing to retire quietly. She was a singer and performer with fire in her personality, bold enough to stand beside a legend who demanded constant attention. Their connection felt intoxicating at first, a partnership built on music admiration and the promise of companionship during his aging years. But beneath the surface, unresolved chaos still lurked. Marriage might have seemed like an attempt at redemption, yet this fourth union would soon become the most legally confusing and emotionally volatile chapter in his personal history. From the earliest days of their relationship, tension hovered. Scenes of discord echoed through their lavish properties, and neighbors grew familiar with the unsettling sounds of confrontation. Local police in South Carolina often responded to disturbance calls from the Brown residents, arriving to shattered objects, raised voices, and accusations neither side could fully explain. Officers documented bruises on Tommy Ray and erratic behavior from James, confirming that turmoil still followed him no matter how many vows he exchanged. Each visit from law enforcement chipped further away at the carefully cultivated myth that the superstar had calmed with age. In moments of charm, James publicly praised Tommy Ray and introduced her as his lawful wife, but privately the boundaries between affection and control remained dangerous. His grip tightened whenever he feared losing relevance. Fame had once shielded him from scrutiny, but by this period tabloids and television crews eagerly sought evidence of his decline. Every argument became fodder for gossip pages, and Tommy Ray, who once dreamed of sharing a glamorous life at his side, found herself trapped in an emotional maze where love and fear existed side by side. Complications multiplied when their son James Joseph Brown II was born. The arrival of a child should have brought stability. Instead, it intensified scrutiny. Questions arose about inheritance legitimacy and marital status. Lawyers eventually discovered that Tommy Ray had never finalized an annulment from a previous relationship. This meant that her marriage to James Brown, celebrated in public, may have been legally invalid. The revelation triggered shockwaves through the Brown family tree. Was she a devoted spouse or someone positioned to secure access to a legendary estate? As battles intensified, attorneys took center stage. They pored over legal documents, examined timelines, and challenged the rights James Brown claimed for his last family. The conflict exposed how fragile his personal affairs had become. A man who once enforced order with absolute command on stage now faced a loss of control that no rhythm or rehearsal could fix. Meanwhile, Tommy Ray insisted she had always acted in good faith, that love, not strategy, pulled her into his life. Yet her detractors speculated she had kept the unresolved marriage as leverage, a backup plan, in case the future demanded proof of independence. Even as age and illness crept in, the cycle of confrontation and reconciliation remained relentless. The public saw police cars flashing outside his home, heard reporters debating legitimacy, and witnessed a superstar still consumed by turbulence. Tommy Ray's chapter revealed that the shadow trailing James Brown had never lifted. Marriage, fatherhood, legacy, none of it erased the darker patterns that began long before she appeared. And as he neared the final act of his life, the most striking truth emerged even at the end. Peace remained out of reach for the man who once made the world dance. Death on Christmas Day and the war over a legacy. Christmas morning in 2006 should have been a day of celebration and rest for most families in America. Instead, it marked the end of an era. James Brown, the godfather of soul, died at age 73 in an Atlanta hospital after suffering congestive heart failure. News of his passing raced across the world, honoring his groundbreaking career and unmatched stage power. Fans gathered outside venues where he once performed. Television reran iconic concerts. Radio stations replayed his greatest hits in tribute. But while the world mourned a legend, a fierce struggle ignited among those who had known him most intimately, his complicated family. The applause outside masked a legal storm brewing inside courthouses and living rooms alike. At the center of the turmoil stood Tommy Ray Heine, the woman who claimed to be his widow and their young son, James Joseph Brown II. She insisted she had every right as a legitimate spouse, emotional, parental, and financial. However, attorneys representing Brown's estate uncovered records showing that her previous marriage had never been properly annulled. If that documentation held, the relationship that she had publicly referred to as marriage would be legally invalid. Overnight, the woman who believed she was the grieving fourth wife became a figure of suspicion. Did she belong among the heirs or outside the gates entirely? Facing her across the legal battlefield were Brown's older children from earlier marriages, Yama Deanna and Larry, alongside the memories of two deceased sons, Teddy and Terry. Each carried their own pain history and resentment. They argued that Tommy Ray had manipulated public perception and sought control over their father's fortune. They questioned her motives, challenged her role, and demanded that the law decide who James Brown truly intended to provide for. Personal grievances spilled into televised interviews and newspaper quotes. The conflict that once remained confined to domestic walls now unfolded before millions. South Carolina courts were soon overwhelmed with motions, petitions, and disputes. Judges analyzed wills, examined signatures, and debated the meaning of documents that should have secured peace. Instead, every page invited more confusion. The will itself allocated most of Brown's wealth and music rights to a charitable education fund designed to support disadvantaged children, a final vision of giving back to the community that shaped him. Yet legal action immediately froze its execution. A dream meant to uplift the next generation was locked away in filing cabinets, stalled by familial mistrust and competing claims of entitlement. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps during hearings, eager to capture whispers of scandal. Commentators dissected every twist with fascination, a global superstar whose personal life ended in chaos. A widow fighting to be recognized, children demanding justice for a complex father, and lawyers caught in the crossfire of legacy and loss. The man who once urged audiences to stand together left behind a family divided. Every headline seemed to underline the irony. Even in death, James Brown kept the world arguing. As years passed, some wounds deepened while others faded quietly. But the legal disputes dragged on, delaying closure for everyone involved. His influence remains powerful, and his contributions to music remain immortal. Yet the unresolved battles surrounding his estate cast a shadow over his legend. A figure who once symbolized resilience and pride left a final chapter filled with unanswered questions. The stage that once celebrated unity was replaced by a courtroom demanding separation. And the scholarship fund, the most selfless part of his last wishes, has remained suspended, waiting for his family to finally choose peace over war. Yama speaks out, breaking the silence for the world to hear. For most of her adulthood, Yama Brown lived in the complicated shadow of a man the world praised and she feared. The daughter of an icon learned to perform emotional gymnastics, smiling politely during interviews about her father's greatness while privately wrestling with memories that kept her awake at night. She had spent years trying to justify what happened, convincing herself that silence would protect her family. But as she approached midlife, she realized that silence was not survival, it was surrender. After nearly 42 years, the truth she had carried quietly became too heavy to keep buried. In 2014, she made a transformative decision: she would finally tell her story without censorship. Her memoir, Cold Sweat. My Father James Brown and Me, was not a tabloid exposé or a collection of accusations meant to destroy a legacy. Instead, it was a deeply personal testimony about trauma resilience and the desperate hope for healing. Yama wrote candidly about her father's dual nature, how millions saw the charismatic entertainer, while she and her sister saw someone unpredictable, someone whose anger could erupt into terror. The book brought her a wave of relief, followed quickly by a wave of controversy. The public reaction was instantly divided. Some fans reached out to comfort her, expressing sorrow that a beloved cultural leader had inflicted such pain behind closed doors. They appreciated her bravery and acknowledged that greatness in art does not erase cruelty in life. Others, however, responded with disbelief, accusing her of exaggeration, betrayal, and exploiting her father's name. To them, the godfather of soul could only be a hero. A daughter's truth threatened the myth they had worshipped for decades, and they refused to let that myth crack. But Yama did not retreat. As the years passed, she found new platforms to reclaim the narrative of her childhood. In 2024, she participated in the landmark documentary series Say It Loud once again, confronting the memories she once hid. This time, she faced the camera eyes unflinching, detailing the emotional scars she carried into adulthood and the generational cycles she struggled to break. Viewers could see the cost of speaking up etched into her voice, bravery forged by years of silence. Throughout the series, producers juxtaposed archival footage of James Brown's mesmerizing presence on stage, electric commanding, worshipped by roaring crowds, with Yama's quiet recollections of fear. This contrast forced many to confront an uncomfortable truth: legendary influence does not erase private harm. The documentary asked audiences to consider the human consequences of genius left unchecked, especially when fame shields abusive behavior from scrutiny. To this day, the debate around her revelations continues. Supporters applaud her honesty as a form of liberation, an overdue recognition that children of powerful figures deserve dignity, not erasure. Critics still cling to the heroic iconography of James Brown, insisting greatness should not be re-evaluated. But Yama remains steadfast. She has said that storytelling is not revenge, it is survival and a message to others enduring similar trauma. By breaking her silence, she reclaimed her voice, and in doing so, she invited the world to finally see the full truth, both the brilliance and the brutality of the man who shaped her life. Legend or monster? The final question we must confront. The story of James Brown invites a reckoning that stretches far beyond the stadium lights that once crowned him king. His contributions to music shaped generations' funk soul, and the spirit of black empowerment would sound different without him. Millions still feel a jolt of energy when his voice blasts through speakers. Yet parallel to that public triumph lived a hidden narrative of personal devastation. The same hands that gripped microphones with power were described as the source of harm at home. Reconciling those opposing identities requires more than nostalgia. It demands a confrontation with complexity. Nearly every fan remembers the dazzling performer who danced with superhuman intensity, the activist who encouraged pride during times of national fracture, and the artist who refused to be overshadowed by any force, including injustice. But those closest to him did not experience that unwavering positivity. Their memories reflect a man whose internal anguish erupted into control, intimidation, and fear. Two realities stand in conflict, each claiming to represent his essence. Was one a facade? Or were both equally true images of a deeply conflicted figure shaped by trauma he never overcame? It raises a question many struggle to answer. Can a cultural hero also be a private villain? Society has a long history of celebrating talent while ignoring what happens behind closed doors. We crave powerful icons, but we often hesitate to examine the cost of their genius on the people forced to love them up close. In this story, the cost was measured in bruises, nightmares, and silence that lasted for decades. His daughter's voice challenges us to look deeper, to see the shadow cast by the spotlight we once praised without hesitation. What responsibility do admirers bear when they continue to uplift a figure whose cruelty harmed those he was supposed to protect? Some argue that legacies must reflect the full range of a person's actions, good and bad. Others insist that artistic contribution should be preserved without contamination from personal flaws. The tension between accountability and admiration has never felt sharper than when applied to someone as influential as James Brown. His music still moves bodies. His truth still fractures hearts. That leads us back to the core dilemma. How should the world remember him? As the man who calmed Boston when the country threatened to riot? Or as the father whose own children curled beneath beds praying for safety? History often simplifies people into heroes or monsters. But what happens when someone embodies both? Denying either side feels dishonest. Accepting both feels unsettling. Yet this discomfort might be the closest we can come to justice. So now the question turns to you, the audience who dances to his beats, the viewers who have heard the testimony of those who lived with him. After everything revealed, who is the real James Brown in your eyes? Is he the groundbreaking pioneer who changed music forever, or the household tyrant described by his family? Can one man be admired and condemned at the same time? Drop your thoughts below, because this story doesn't end on a stage. It ends in the conversation we have right now. James Brown changed music forever, but the pain his daughter revealed forces us to ask, can a legend's greatness erase the terror he caused at home? Some believe his genius deserves honor no matter what. Others say true legacy must include every hidden truth, even the darkest ones. Was he a cultural savior who empowered millions, or a destructive force who left his own family shattered? The answer isn't simple, and it may never be unanimous. So tell us below, how will you remember him? A hero or a fractured man behind the spotlight?